Ghana's ambassador to the United States of America and members of the Ghanaian delegation, the chairman, deputy chairman, and assistant chairpersons of the International Democratic Union, chairpersons of the respective committees of the IDU, delegates, fellow Democrats, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the organizers of the 2023 Forum of the International Democratic Union, IDU, warmly for the opportunity to be part of this prestigious event, celebrating the 40th year of the founding of the IDU, which is bringing together under one roof those of us who believe that the application of democratic principles and values and the operation of strong private sector-dominated market economies with good, honest management of public finances provides the most effective platform for growth and development. It is good to be able to say that we in the center-right have won the ideological battle of the 20th century. And today, the realization of the center-right philosophy is the one that has taken and continues to take millions of people out of poverty and to create broad-based prosperity. Events of the last few years involving the recent surge of extremist ideologies and the propagation of discredited authoritarian solutions to contemporary development challenges mean, however, that we cannot just pat ourselves on the back and say center-right policies and philosophies have become the dominant ideologies around the world, and therefore our work is done. We need a continuous process of engaging our peoples on what our values are, because an ideology that seeks to liberate the energies of people and generate opportunities for them to realize their God-given talents is the best route for bringing prosperity to all peoples of the world, especially for those of us in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the organizers have chosen the most relevant theme of Africa's contemporary situation, a theme which sums up the essence of African aspirations, a new vision for Africa. I have moved beyond getting upset about our story not being told truthfully by the media. I accept that good news about Africa travels so much slower than bad news. I do not try to cite the few success stories that dot the continent and offer them as evidence to counteract the poor and unstable Africa continent story. However, the stark truth is that today, much of Africa is not at work, a large section is uneducated, an alarming proportion is unemployed, and almost all of it feels dependent. It appears the words Africa and Africans have more resonance outside the continent than inside. When we are at home on our continent, it always seems very important to assert that we are Ghanaians, Nigerians, Kenyans, Zimbabweans, Zambians, Swazis, Senegalese, Rwandans, and South Africans. Then we find ourselves outside the continent, and we discover that in the outside world there are no Ghanaians, there are no Senegalese, and there are no Tanzanians. There are Africans. We're all simply Africans. The lesson is clear. Our destinies are intricately linked with each other. And we're talking not only about those of us on the continent, but about the Africans in the diaspora as well. You can be an honors graduate from any of the top universities in this country. But if there's an outbreak of Ebola someplace on the African continent, you are an African. So what is this new Africa that we must seek to create? Ladies and gentlemen, ours is a continent that is home to some of the most spectacular scenes that nature has bestowed on this planet. Our continent has every mineral that mankind lusts after: and which is required to run a modern economy. 30% of the Earth's remaining minerals and 2/3 of the world's arable lands can be found on the continent. Paradoxically, the African people happen also to be the poorest in the world. Our continent also has the youngest population and the biggest pool of unemployed, and our youth, who bear the brunt of the suffering, now resort to desperate measures to get out. They brave the Sahara Desert on foot, and those who survive the ravages of the desert risk being sold in slave markets in Libya, or risk journeys across the Mediterranean Sea on rickety boats, all in the forlorn hope of a better life in Europe, in countries where they are obviously not welcome. To the outside world, therefore, we're defined as that modern entity called an illegal immigrant. Africa has been called many names throughout the ages: dark, beleaguered, a scar on the conscience of the world, hapless, and hopeless are some of the more frequent and colorful ones that can be repeated in decent company. Anyone, everybody, in a position of leadership in Africa today thus has his work cut out. I do not suggest that we lock up our young people to prevent them embarking on these hazardous journeys. The urgent responsibility we face is to make our countries and our continent attractive to our youth, to see as places of opportunities. It means we must provide education, quality education and skills training. It means our young people must acquire the skills that run modern economies. There will always be those amongst our young people who want to try their fortunes in foreign countries. When they are skilled, they will not have to risk drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. They will be headhunted and treated with dignity. With Africa's economies largely dependent on the production and export of raw materials, we must embark on the process of creating value-added economies that will provide jobs, develop strong middle-class societies, and lift the masses of our people out of poverty. Our message should be to build value-added industrialized economies with modernized agricultures, trading in the global marketplace on the basis of things we make and grow, and charting our own self-reliant, independent path within the World Economic Order. Indeed, we want our relations with the rest of the world to be characterized by an increase in trade and investment cooperation, and not by the export and import of raw materials. This, I believe, is the way to develop healthy relations between nations. There should be enough money in Africa to be able to enable us to pay for educating and training our young people and making them ready to compete and face the world. Where is this money, I hear you ask? As a start, I refer to the report of the panel, chaired by the highly respected former South African President, Thabo Mbeki, on the illicit flow of funds from Africa, which has raised the lid of what many had always suspected, but did not have the figures to support. According to the report, Africa is losing annually more than 88 billion United States dollars through illicit financial outflows. The spiriting part of the story, of course, is the fact that some Africans are complicit in taking these monies out of our countries and largely into Western countries. But the majority of it is spirited out by those who come, claiming to do business with us. It is clear that we have not been well empowered to cope with those who come to conduct businesses in our country, with the aim of making extraordinary returns through unorthodox and illegal means. It is clear that no one is going to sort out these matters for Africa except Africans themselves, and we need to do so as a matter of urgency. We must match those who come to do business with us in all the skills they possess. We must have our own set of bright and sharp lawyers, our own set of bright and sharp accountants to keep us abreast with the sharp and bright lawyers and accountants that our trade partners have. Much the same way, we need to have our own bright and sharp technologists to keep us abreast with our competitors. Some investors always find innovative ways to avoid paying the taxes that they should in the African countries in which they operate. The proposal to impose a 10% tax on the operations of multinationals in the countries where they work, which has been developed by the OECD, is laudable and should be actively promoted and supported. By the same token, we must take the hard decision to enhance the tax-to-GDP ratio in our respective countries to enable us finance our own development, like others do. It is in these areas that it becomes obvious that there's great advantage in African countries operating together as a bloc, rather than as individual countries. As our elders say, there is strength in unity. It has been shown that countries or groups of countries with the largest share of world trade are located within regions with the largest share of intra-regional trade. Trade between African countries remains low compared to other parts of the world. In the year 2000, intra-regional trade accounted for 10% of Africa's total trade, increased marginally to 11% in 2015, and is today 14%. Trading amongst members of the European Union, for example, amounted to 70% in 2015. An African common market, single market, presents immense opportunities to bring prosperities to our continent and to its long-suffering peoples, with hard work, creativity, ingenuity, innovation, and enterprise. I'm happy that on 1st January 2021, we took an important step towards the realization of this vision, with the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, whose secretariat Ghana is privileged to host. It holds a promise for Africa's prosperity by fueling economic growth, expanding decent jobs, and raising living standards for all Africans. The AFCFTA links 54 markets covering 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of some 3.5 trillion United States dollars. By 2050, it will cover an estimated 2.5 billion people and house over a quarter of the world's working-age population. The investments and business opportunities offered to the private sector by the infrastructure required to link these markets more effectively are enormous. A recent study by the World Bank, in partnership with the AFCFTA Secretariat, indicated that the agreement, when fully implemented, would raise incomes in Africa by 9% by 2035 and lift 50 million people out of extreme poverty. Foreign direct investment to Africa would increase by between 111% and 159% under the agreement, and wages would rise by some 11.2% for women and some 9.8% for men by 2035. Africa's exports to the rest of the world will also go up by 32% by 2035, and intra-African exports will grow by 109%, led by manufactured goods. Overall, the agreement will make Africa very attractive for investment, expand trade, provide better jobs, reduce poverty, and increase shared prosperity for all Africans. thereby accelerating attainment of both Agenda 2063 and the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. For this free trade area to be viable, there must be peace and stability on the continent. Nothing undermines the prospect of our continent more than being known as unstable, and unfortunately, our politics has been the main source of the spark for instability. I'm clear in my mind that democratic governance produces both freedom and stability. We in Ghana should know, because having tried everything else, we finally reached a consensus that a multi-party system of governance works best for us. We illustrate the validity of the greatest of British prime ministers, Winston Churchill's famous statement that, quote, democracy is the worst form of governance, except for all the others, unquote. Ghana's Fourth Republic has lasted for 3 decades under a liberal democratic constitution, which has spawned the longest uninterrupted period of stable constitutional governance in our hitherto turbulent history. The country is stable, and there have been 3 peaceful changes of government from a ruling party to an opposition party without endangering the foundations of the state. Principles of democratic accountability, respect for human rights, individual property rights, and the rule of law are now firmly entrenched in Ghana's body politic and are helping to promote accountable governance. Our institutions are growing, and the self-confidence of the people is becoming manifest. I dare say that we accept that a political party can lose an election with grace and serve with honor in opposition. The latest shining example of President George Weah of Liberia and his statesmanlike concession defeat after his defeat in Liberia's presidential election is there for all of us to appreciate. The greatest challenge for us in Ghana and for the entire continent remains the creation of sustainable jobs. The African Union's Agenda 2063, titled The Africa We Want, calls for an education and skills revolution to meet the human resource needs for inspiring Africa's socioeconomic development. The African Union has quite correctly placed high premium on science, technology, and innovation as critical requirements to the achievement of Agenda 2063. All over the world, governments encourage universities to promote technological advancement by investing public funds into research and development and stimulating linkages between academia and the private sector. We still have a lot of work to do in these areas, and it is time, ladies and gentlemen, to encourage our researchers to think big and for governments to offer the incentives and extend the protection they need for their inventions. Another important sub-theme, which is also critical to realizing the vision of a new Africa, is graduate employability. Studies have shown that investment in human resources is one venture that yields the maximum benefit to any nation. According to the State of Education in Africa report, published by the Africa-America Institute, returns on investments in higher education in Africa is 21%, the highest in the world. While this is good news for us as a continent, we should face the very unpleasant fact that for many of our graduates, a university education is no longer a guarantee of a job. We need to make sure that the curricula we offer are relevant to the skills needs of the job market. Our products should have transferable skills to enable them cope with the realities of the modern-day world of work, which has embraced the digital revolution. In current global dispensation, where universities are becoming entrepreneurial to remain relevant, our universities have to engage themselves more and closely with the private sector. The provision of education for our young people should not become an ideological issue. We should never have to make a choice between basic education or higher education. We should never have to rely on the World Bank or any other institution to decide for us where the emphasis should be in our education needs. Education is the key to our development, and we must run our economies to be able to fund the education of our children. We should not get into arguments with donor agencies about our priorities. We must set our own priorities, and we must accept that we should provide the funds to translate our plans into reality. Despite the strident opposition of my political opponents to the introduction of the free senior high school policy, my government has, over these last 7 years, managed to finance this important evolution of our education, which has led to a significant expansion, not only of access, but also of quality in our educational system. As it becomes clearer to all of us, the problems that face the world are more likely to be quickly resolved when we are all prosperous than when half the world is immersed in poverty. The problems of the environment and climate change, in particular, can only be properly addressed when we're able to deal with poverty. A hungry, homeless, jobless person has not got much at stake in the battle we want to fight for the survival of the planet. It is also not likely that the underdeveloped part of the world will want to serve as the forest reserve or museum to save the planet for the developed, prosperous world. I happen to believe that no one needs to be poor for others to be rich. We're fully committed to the necessity to act to save the planet from climate degradation. Indeed, our continent, for instance, the outstanding example of Lake Chad, has been the hardest hit from the adverse of climate change, even though we are the lowest emitters in the world, 4% compared to the 76% of the developed world. We believe that, however, that asking Africa to abandon forthwith the exploitation of our abundant natural resources is to condemn Africa to perpetual poverty. The developed world is responsible for 76% of global carbon emissions, while Africa is responsible for 4%. There is therefore the ever need for a balance between the social, economic, and environmental imperatives of climate action if equitable global development is to be achieved. There is enough on our planet to enable all of us to be prosperous in a sustainable world. Ghana's nationally determined contributions towards combating climate change have been fully integrated into government's coordinated program for economic and social development policies to facilitate their implementation. In addition to my government rolling out a number of green initiatives, I've established an advisory group of prominent private sector chief executives who are setting up a $100 million SDGs delivery fund and a $200 million green fund to complement government's efforts at tackling climate change and funding the implementation of the SDGs. We must renew our commitment to build, keep, and consolidate peace and democracy in Africa, or we should have to brace ourselves to live in a new and more dangerous world today and in the future. One of the greatest threats to our security and stability has to be the proliferation and sophistication of terrorist networks in Africa. They should not only be a source of great concern to the continent of Africa, but they should also be of concern to the rest of the world. In addition to the numerous attacks orchestrated by these armed criminal groups, their presence fuels violence along communal and sectarian lines in countries such as we're witnessing in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And the insecurity engendered by the armed groups has resulted in rising levels of displacement of populations in many parts of the Sahel and the resurgence of unconstitutional changes of governments. We have seen military takeovers in Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Gabon, and failed coup attempts in Guinea-Bissau and Sierra Leone. Military takeovers expose further the fragilities of democratic governance in Africa, with these takeovers taking on a now common pattern. Dealing with this problem of coups may well start from the civilian governments which have the primary responsibility to build trust in the democratic dispensation, even in these challenging times. There should be no backsliding in support for democratic values anchored on the promotion of the rule of law and respect for human rights. And when the coups do happen, we must extend collectively the needed support to the transition process, including in the Sahel, where the military, having tasted power, seem reluctant to restore democratic rule. This is the time for a global coalition of democracies, a coalition of the willing, determined to banish the specter of terrorism and violent extremism and unconstitutional changes of governments. Silencing the guns, indeed, has to be a vital condition for the orderly progress of our continent. And I dare say our institution, the International Democratic Union, has a critical role to play in this development. Ladies and gentlemen, we've done enough talking, and dare I say, we've had enough conferences and workshops in Africa. We know what we need to do. It is time just to do it. We've run out of excuses for the state of our continent. We have the manpower, we should have the political will. It is time to make Africa work. There might be 54 countries. We must resent sometimes being lumped together for the wrong reasons, but there are strong ties that bind us together as Africans. We have good reasons to be proud of who we are and the beautiful continent that is ours. The geographic space covered by Africa makes us the second largest of the 7 continents. She has some of the most breathtaking scenes on our planet. She has plants and animals that are wonders of the world and critical for the survival of the planet. She has vibrant cultures that are attractive to all and sundry. I hear a lot about the need to change our narrative and tell our own good stories. Ladies and gentlemen, as the saying goes, nothing succeeds as much as success. If we work at it, if we stop being beggars and spend Africa's monies inside the continent, Africa would not need to ask for respect from anyone. We should get the respect we need. When people come to Africa to do business, especially when they come to invest, they must know exactly what to expect. They must know they've come to a continent where there is the rule of law, a police service that can be counted on to deal fairly and speedily with the law and order issues that come up every day. They must know that there is an independent and efficient judiciary that will preside over and resolve the frictions and disputes that come with all human activities. And they must know that they will meet the tax agencies that are capable of ensuring meticulous scrutiny over their transactions. Over 30 years ago, Princeton University, one of America's most prestigious Ivy League universities, offered a course in Mandarin, which for years had virtually no takers. Today, there's standing room only. And it is not because the course is any easier. It is because the position of China has changed. 35 years ago, China was nowhere near it is today. China does not ask anyone for respect now. She does not need to. Our young people must see and feel the dividends of the democratic system of governments. Our success story and changed narrative come with building economies that are not dependent on charity and handouts. Then we shall put an educated, employed, and empowered Africa to work and repudiate the recent culture of failure. Then we shall build a new Africa and take our rightful place in the world and help construct a new African civilization that will make her own unique contribution to the growth of world civilization. Then we will realize a new vision for Africa. May God bless us all and Mother Africa and make her great and strong. Many thanks once again for the invitation, and thank you very much.